So potentially these sanctions can be very impactful and quite significant, because previously the policy of the US administration, mostly Biden administration, when imposing sanctions, was to keep the Russian oil on the markets and reroute them from maybe European markets to Indian and Chinese purchases. Accordingly, Rosneft and Lukoil, especially Rosneft, was actually under sanctions, but relatively limited ones, sectoral, which still allowed it to trade oil. Currently, putting these companies and their subsidiaries on SDN lists is prohibitive because, as the Treasury outline flags, there are possible consequences, secondary sanctions for the buyers of Russian oil. In this case, we're talking primarily about India and China, and especially India, given the intensified pressure on it by the Trump administration, including the tariffs imposed before. Despite tremendous casualties that Russia suffered, the total is, at this point, the total count is above 1 million. And serious economic consequences. Russia's economy is stagnating at the moment, potentially looming recession. Nonetheless, it hasn't radically altered Putin's calculus to continue this war, because the war is being fought on ideological reasons, and Putin and the Kremlin are relatively insulated from the impact of society and the Russian elites. Even with shrinking oil revenues, which currently actually constitute about, like energy revenues total, constitute about 30% of Russia's budget income, so that's significant. Nonetheless, that alone is unlikely to radically alter Putin's calculus, just because he's been fighting it for a while. Having said that, what sanctions can achieve successfully is limiting the resources available in Putin's hands to continue this war. Much of the revenues of the budget are being used to fund Russia's military-industrial complex. The sanctions per se, it's not enough to introduce them, because Russia finds a way to circumvent them typically within 1-3 months. It varies, of course, but in general, it's not enough to just introduce sanctions and just let them be. So from that perspective, the Trump administration finally sends a very important signal to other purchasers, like customers and all sorts of agents who continue to engage with Russia, that there might be serious consequences coming, and this administration is going to try and enforce the sanctions design going forward. So from that perspective, it's a very welcome signal, even if per se it's unlikely to be highly decisive for this war.
Well, this will be another blow, and a significant blow, to the Russian economy. Rosneft and Lukoil are the major oil companies in Russia. Russia depends upon oil and gas exports for most of its foreign currency, so they are critical to the operation of the economy. They are not, I would say, a full body blow, but they will add to pressure. They'll reduce oil revenues, further weaken the already stumbling Russian economy. And so all these things are positive. And beyond that, they are, I would say, first major new Russian sanctions, Trump sanctions, on the Russian economy. And that may be the single most important element of today's decision. But we've seen President Trump, while understanding, it seems, that Putin was the obstacle to peace and that he needed to put pressure on Russia, he seemed to be reluctant to do that. So today we've seen this step forward on sanctions, and we also saw a step forward on the weapons side in the form of removing restrictions on weapons that have American components in them. We were blocking their use, at least partly, not blocking, but restricting their use against targets in Russia, and those limits now seem to be off. So I would call this package of steps very positive, but not as strong as they could have been. The meeting in Budapest should never have been seen as a certainty, because Trump said after he saw Zelensky, I expect to see Putin soon in Budapest, but first Rubio, who'll be in charge of this, has to set the agenda for that meeting with Lavrov. So the only thing he said last week was for sure Rubio would be in touch with Lavrov, not that he and Putin would meet. And then, of course, Rubio was in touch. It was important it was Rubio, who can understand what the Russians are up to being in charge of that. And Rubio reported back to Trump that there's nothing there. And so then Trump said, well, no reason for me to meet with Putin. So Trump seems to be coming to a greater understanding that Putin is up to no good. So I don't have any doubt that if we gave them Tomahawks tomorrow, without any American instructions, they'd figure out within 2 or 3 months how to use them very effectively. So President Trump, took some arguments made by experts who don't really understand Ukraine to justify something he didn't want to do. But having said that, if he really wants Putin to make peace along the lines of his own proposal, he's going to have to put much more pressure on Russia than just what he did today. And Tomahawk should be part of that. And ruling them out today, at least for the next year, eases the pressure when he should want to increase the pressure.